playing with some technical difficulty here, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We do have a last-minute addition that we're trying to bring in through the firewall of technology, but I'll go ahead and kick it over to our CEO, Jeff Cooper.
Well, thanks, Robert, and hopefully everyone can hear me. I want to thank everybody for joining our webinar this afternoon. I apologize for the technical difficulties. We did have a last-minute addition to the webinar. I think by now everybody knows that President Trump signed the $2 trillion CARES Act into law last Friday. Obviously, the purpose of that package is to provide emergency relief and stimulus to individual Americans, but also to American businesses that are suffering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So as we previously discussed, the final bill that was passed includes some provisions that could be very helpful to ethanol producers, especially in terms of employee retention. But that bill was obviously quite complex and multifaceted and difficult to navigate. So we've gathered some experts here today to help break down the key provisions of that package. And we think you're going to hear some information and see some slides that will be very useful to you and your businesses today. Can I ask folks to put their phones on mute, please? I'm getting a lot of typing noise, keyboard noise. So please mute your lines. Like I said, we've gathered some experts here today that are going to help break down the key provisions of the package. We think you'll find this information useful to you and your businesses. This is also an excellent opportunity to ask questions of these folks. We were hoping before we take a deep dive into the provisions that would like to ask Thomas Salisbury, who is the regional administrator of the Small Business Administration, to say a few words. I'm not sure if we've been able to access his line yet, but if so, we'll turn it over to him, and if not, I'll hand it back to Robert and we can get started. But
hang on
Missy?
a second, Jeff. I'm going to unmute everybody's lines. And if you're an attendee, could you please just mute your line, and we're going to see if we can find Mr. Salisbury. Could you guys please mute your line?
Yeah, that's not going to work, Missy.
Can you hear us? Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, that's not going to work. So, Robert, let's go ahead and jump in with the presentations, and hopefully we can get Administrator Salisbury set up as that's happening. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jeff. Again, welcome everyone. Go ahead and mute your lines again if you can. We're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully we can add our special guest in here in a minute. Some quick webinar housekeeping notes. If you're having any technical difficulty with login or viewing or even hearing us, those are the numbers to call, or the number to call. And if you would like to ask a question about any of the content, you can use the Q&A box located in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. Make sure you choose all presenters when asking a question so we'll all be able to see it, or I'd actually encourage you to wait for the Q&A section at the end. We will unmute all the lines and hopefully have a little less feedback at that point, but get down to that intimate conversation to get your questions answered. And for those that are not able to be on the webinar or would like to share it on a future date or time, we will be sharing a link for a recorded version of this for everyone to use. Today's webinar, as you heard Jeff, hopefully we'll hear from Thomas Salisbury from the Small Business Administration. We also have two different teams from our great associate members, Keiko Isom and Christensen PLLP, Donna Funk, Justin Mantelli, Kayla Jenkins, and on the Christian side, John, Teresa Carlson, and Jamie Klein. I don't see any change to her status, so Donna, get your presentation up here and ready for you to take off.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to RFA and all the members for allowing us to present some of this information to you guys today. As Robert and Jeff have said, there is a lot of information that came out in the package. There's a lot that is still coming out and being clarified. So as we continue to work through that, we'll continue to post updates as we get them as well. So we're going to go through part of that package today, and then John and Jamie and Teresa will go through other provisions as well. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kayla Jenkins to go through the first piece of our presentation and talk about one of the provisions in the stimulus package that we think has a lot of appeal to the ethanol industry. So Kayla.
Thanks, Donna. Are we able to go to the next slide? Okay, while they pull that up, just a couple of quick things here. Just to kind of let everybody know, we did have 3 stimulus packages that were passed here. And so the first one was where the EIDL loan for COVID-19 was introduced. So there was some introduction there. There was some eligibility that also allowed some businesses to apply for that economic injury disaster. And then we had phase 2, which is the Families First Coronavirus Act, which also introduced the emergency tax credits, emergency sick paid leave, and really brought together a couple other benefits for businesses affected by COVID-19. And then last but not least is phase 3 on the next slide, where we introduced the CARES Act. It is a $2 trillion stimulus, as all of us have heard. The 2 top programs out of CARES Act coming out right now are the Paycheck Protection Program, also known as the PPP or P3 program. It was awarded $349 billion in that stimulus package, as well as the EIDL loans that were awarded about $10 billion as well. Now, there was a couple other provisions in there that gave funding for economic stabilization funds, as well as the Secretary of Agriculture. There was about $9.5 billion, and then about $14 billion in the Commodity Credit Corporation. We're still kind of looking through a lot of those before we dig into everything else right now, but there may be some opportunity within a couple of those other programs to capture. But today we're going to watch and look at the Paycheck Protection Program loan first. So why should you guys be looking into this program? It's a great program for small businesses, the ability to cover some of the operating expenses for your business, but also the debt forgiveness opportunity as well, making this more like a grant for your operation.
Kayla, could you hang on one moment? I'm so sorry. Mr. Salisbury, could you speak up if you're on the line?
I am on the line.
Okay, we found you. Okay. We have him unmuted, so you guys, sorry for this, but you can have him jump in wherever you need to, Robert.
No, I think, Kayla, as long as you're okay with the interruption, we would go ahead and let Mr. Salisbury speak.
Yeah.
Well, okay, then I will, and I'll try to get out of your way as quickly as I can. And it sounded, just from the standpoint of the introductory remarks that your current speaker was making, it sounds like some of what I'm about to say might be repetitive, so for that I apologize. But it's good to be talking to you all, and maybe I can enhance a little of the comments that are about to be made, because I certainly agree with your presenter's characterization that the Paycheck Protection Program is a wonderfully advantageous program that is partially supported by the SBA, and we certainly encourage any and all of you to take a look at it and examine if it fits your particular needs, and if it looks like it does at all, I would encourage you to access it and pursue it. And I'll just very quickly say, because again, I think it sounds like you're probably going to get some more detail, and that's wonderful. We appreciate that. But I'll quickly say that this, and I heard the young lady also mention the EIDL loan that's housed within the SBA. So I'll just quickly hit on a couple of those. Let's go to Paycheck Protection first. That's a loan that's part of the most recent stimulus package. It is designed to make access to this particular package more simple for you, the borrower, if that's the proper characterization. It enables you to continue and build on and enhance the relationship you currently have with your existing lender, or another lender of your choice, but your existing lender perhaps. The other loan product is a loan direct with the SBA, and I'll briefly mention that, but the Paycheck Protection Program works simply like this. It's a simplified application. It is something that you can work through with your lender. In some of my other comments, I have said you can go to your bank. Well, in reality, you can't go to your bank these days, and so that would mean you would access your bank either by email or by telephone or something of that sort. But the loan product works like this. You determine lost revenue, and that is done using some of your tax information. The IRS is no longer in office right now, so the information would typically come from your 2018 tax information. But within that, there are elements within this particular loan that is made to you by your lender that these funds are designed to support. Most importantly, payroll. Other than that, things such as mortgage payments, mortgage payments, lease payments, rent payments, utilities, the things that would enable you to keep your business operational. And maybe as important as anything, keep your staff employed or on board as well. The application is a 2-page application. It's really quite simple. There are things within this process that are very much outside our normal realm of relationship with these institutions. We do not ask in this case for a personal guarantee. We don't ask in this case for a great deal of tax information other than what we need to support your contention of lost revenue. The process is really quite simple. You and your bank complete the application. They certify the information on the application. They get it to the SBA. The SBA endorses the loan. The loan goes the loan goes to Treasury. Treasury logs the loan. We return the loan endorsed to your lending institution, and they deliver you funds. It's really quite that simple. The loan terms are 1/2 0.5% interest for a 2-year term. The first 6 months of the loan are essentially forgiven. The payment on the loan is waived until the 7th month. Upon the 7th month, you would begin making payments on the proceeds. The interest accrues from the beginning. And essentially at the end of the term, if you can document, and of course I encourage you to talk to your financial advisors and things, but if you can document that you have kept employees on staff to the level that you initially stated, the loan will be forgiven. So that's essentially the nuts and bolts of the payroll protection or the Paycheck Protection Program. The other quick program is Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which is something that is supported as a direct loan from the SBA. A lot of the same elements apply. That's a loan program that is entirely supported online. The way to access that loan is through sba.gov. And at that point, you have an opportunity to, again, create an application using some of the same information that it would have at your lender. You will be asked for head count. You will be asked for revenue loss, things of that sort. And then a loan is created based on the information that you've provided to the SBA. That loan is a direct loan with the SBA. It has different terms. The length of term is 30 years, and the interest rate is 3.75%. So again, you will have an opportunity to support that you kept people on staff, and outside of that, it's, as I said, it's a direct loan between you and the SBA. I've done this really quickly because I feel a little bit bad about interrupting your presenter. Is that probably, Jessica, that probably would do for the fundamental information relative to this loan product. Again, our motivation at the SBA is to really allow you to keep your relationship with your existing lender. They know you, you know them, they know your business, they know your performance, and this is something that's ongoing, and I really hope it enhances the relationship with the lender. One other thing I didn't say, this loan program is specific to the coronavirus incident that we're dealing with, this particular disaster. It is a finite program. It ends. The eligibility and the participation in it is currently scheduled to end on June the 30th of 2020. So access, eligibility, and all that sort of thing. It would be presumptive of me to say that there's going to be more stimulus, but there's also a likelihood of that perhaps happening, and that might change the terms of what we're talking about in terms of availability. But right now it's a finite sum of money, and the program is scheduled to end, as I said, at the end of June. So I would encourage all of you that wish to participate in this to get in touch with your lender, start prepping them for that. The actual accessibility to the loan begins on the 3rd of April, this Friday. And maybe at this point, Jessica, I should say, what have I left out? Your presenter may have a comment on maybe something that they would ask me specifically about, or perhaps you could just proceed, whatever your best thoughts are.
Well, Administrator Salisbury, this is Jeff Cooper,
Sure.
CEO of the RFA, and I just want to thank you again for joining us, and we apologize for the sort of clumsy technical difficulties we had. We appreciate all that you and the SBA have been doing. We know how incredibly busy you've been these past few weeks. But I did want to see if any of our attendees might have a question for you. And if
Sure.
so, I'm going to ask that they write it into the Q&A box on the screen, and we can read the question. That way we're minimizing any background noise. But, you know, as people think of any questions they might have, I don't know if Donna or Jamie or John or any of our presenters may have a question to ask the administrator as well. So we'll give, I guess, a few seconds for people to prepare questions, and Donna, John, Jamie, if you guys had anything directly you wanted to ask Mr. Salisbury, this would be an appropriate time to do that as well.
And while you're thinking about through that, I might just add that there's continuing discussions about some of the details of this. This is Treasury's taking the lead on this. The SBA is a participant and a supporter, of course, with this. Oh, and I didn't say something that I should have. These loans are 100% guaranteed by the SBA. So your lender is unexposed in this particular process. Naturally, they still would want to know your reasoning. They would want to have you defend your loan request. They are the folks that make the loan. They are the folks that disperse the funds to you, but they are unexposed in terms of the risk. And that'll have an impact on their either ability or willingness to continue on with this. The goal here is specifically to get dollars into people's hands as quickly as we possibly can. And in that context, we have waived an enormous amount of our typical policies and procedures on this precisely for that reason. Again, the reason the banks are so critical in this is because they know their customers and they know the risk involved and they know your performance. But I did want to mention the 100% guarantee. So your lender is essentially doing a public service as well.
Mr. Salisbury, this is Kayla Jenkins with Keiko. I was wondering if you had time to stay on and I could go through my presentation, and then if there's questions after, during, if you would like to pipe in every now and then while I go through some of these things.
I will happily do that. I've got, as you might suspect, I've got a few things going on here. But I will put you on like a speakerphone, and don't expect me necessarily to interrupt. I don't feel good about doing that anyway. I've already kind of messed up your meeting, but I will certainly listen, and if questions come up as you wrap up your presentation, I could stay on through the end of that, and then we could maybe attack some questions if there are any at that time. Once that happens, I'll probably need to disconnect and return to some of the things I've got kind of set up here. But I will stay on through your presentation.
Mr. Salisbury, this is Jeff again.
Sure.
We do have a couple of questions that have come in that I can ask right now.
Okay.
One, I think, should be fairly simple to answer, is where is the application available?
The application is now available on both the Treasury website, treasury.gov/CARES. Will give the folks quite a bit of information about this, not only the entire CARES program, but this specific application as well. And I know that it was our intent to give that access to that application on the SBA website as well. Unfortunately, I'm not sure of the status right now as to that, but certainly go on to the Treasury site.
Okay. And another question is, what is the fee we should expect for this loan? And I'm assuming that's the rate, the interest rate. Any information on that?
Well, this might be a question unrelated to interest rate. The interest rate again is 0.5 or 0.5% for that 2-year term. Now, typically, when folks go to a bank, and get an SBA participated loan, there are fees both associated with the lender and there are fees associated with the SBA piece of that loan. In both cases, under these circumstances, those fees are waived. There are no fees from either the lender or the SBA.
Okay, thank you. It says under the Paycheck Protection Program, would we be able to certify that the potential loan is necessary to support our ongoing operations if we have access to untapped existing loan facilities with our existing lender?
Gosh, I hope I understand that. Nothing you're doing on this particular loan product or program impacts your ability to go get other loans, or it doesn't impact any loans you currently have. Now, I say this cautiously because I don't want to go too far off the rails here, but in the SBA world, if anybody out there that's listening has an existing SBA loan, and you correct me if I get too far off the rails, but anybody that has an existing SBA loan, that particular loan is suspended and waived for 6 months, beginning with April. So if you if you have an existing loan, essentially I'm telling you over the phone that SBA will pay that loan for you the next 6 months. And if you have another loan with your lender, nothing prevents you from asking that lender for a deferral. Now, that would be a decision made between you and the lender, but if it's SBA related, it's automatic. If it's not SBA related, that would be a question for you to ask your lender. Is that the way you read or understood the question?
Yes, I do think that addresses the question.
Okay, good.
And then I've got one more here for you, and then we'll return to our presenter. The question is there a plan in the event the applications exceed the funds available for Paycheck Protection?
That is a great question, and the answer is, as I stated, it's a finite sum of money. Now, that does not preclude, and again, that's where I got into the speculation part, we don't have any knowledge of what might unfold in later days and later weeks related to the stimulus, but as this particular legislation is currently structured and set up, it is a finite sum of money, and I guess in the harshest of terms, when it runs out, it runs out. So get to your lender and get there quickly.
Yeah, it sounds like the take-home message is don't wait around, folks, to get this process going. But with that, Mr. Administrator, I think those are the questions we had in the queue for you, and we will return to our presentation now. again, appreciate your time so much, knowing how busy you are this afternoon. And to the extent that you can hang around the call for a while and answer any other questions, that would be wonderful. We also understand if you need to move on to other obligations, but thank you again.
You're most welcome. Good to be with you. I will stay on to the end of this current existing presentation, and if that leads to other questions, we'll do our best, and then I'll have to disconnect.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we're going to turn it back over to the KCO ISOM folks.
Thanks, guys. If we can go ahead and flip to the next slide, we'll dig right into the meat and potatoes of this. So eligible applicants, we've heard small businesses, less than 500 employees, or a 501c3 nonprofit with less than 500 employees. There is a small opportunity if a business has more than 500 employees. It does depend on the NAICS code. So we will have to look at that code if you are concerned that your business has greater than 500 employees to see if you are eligible for this opportunity with the PPP loan. The other thing to note on this is when determining if a business employs not more than 500 employees, per the CARES Act that we have read, that it is saying any full-time or part-time employee or other basis is what they determine as an employee. So please take note of those full-time, part-time, or other basis employees as well. Then as we think into the next slide, we go from eligible applicants to certifying these applicants. We do have to make sure on that application that we are certifying that we have been impacted by the COVID-19 and our business has taken a loss. You will also have to say the funds will be used to retain those workers and maintain payroll. One of the things that I will state is when we do the certification on that application, anybody that is an owner of more than 20% within a business will have to also certify within that application. So please be mindful on that application and read through those instructions. We do have to make sure all eligible owners greater than 20% initial that application. And then there's also a couple of, if you are a partnership or an LLC, we do have to make sure for some of those entities that have managing members, they also certify that you guys are utilizing those funds for the reason why this program was created. As we go into the next slide, then we start taking a look at the loan amount. So the loan amount is based off of the payroll. So it is the lesser of the two, actually. So $10 million is the max, or the maximum loan amount of 2.5 times your monthly payroll. I'd actually like to know, Mr. Salisbury, if you could jump on. We've been looking at some of the CARES Act and the application and what the businesses will have to supply regarding around what this payroll is. Is it just going to be the 2019 941, 943 forms, payroll forms, or how are they going to have to look at that payroll calculation?
Well, ma'am, as it turns out, that the IRS has essentially left the building, so 2019 is not available. So the tax information from 2018 will be the information that we would ask for review.
Okay, that works. So we'll just have to make sure we definitely look at that average monthly payroll incurred. As Mr. Salisbury said, at 2.5 times will be the loan amount. So remember, it's the lesser of the two, which would be your monthly payroll times 2.5 or $10 million. As we go into the next slide, then, we will look at the definition of a payroll cost. So the definition of payroll cost is salary, wages, commissions. It is capped at $100,000, and I'll jump into that in just a quick second. It also looks at the employee benefits for like vacation, medical, sick leave, provisions of group health care benefits, including insurance premiums, and payment of any retirement benefit as well. The payroll costs also include state and local taxes assessed on compensation, and going through that. What does not include for your payroll costs is compensation of employee with an annual salary greater than $100,000 as prorated over the covered period. So what this means is if you have an employee that makes $150,000, we can count up to the $100,000. We just cannot count over the $100,000. So take out the $50,000 in your monthly payroll calculation. The other thing to note here is in the law, in the CARES Act, it does state that any compensation of an employee whose principal place of residence is outside the U.S., we cannot include their payroll in the calculation. We also have to kind of take a look at some of the FICA and SUTA taxes that are imposed and withheld under the different chapters. And if you took any advantage of the sick or family leave wages under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, we do need to back those out as well. So now that we've looked at how to identify your loan amount and the payroll costs, eligible use of funds, as we said already, can be used for payroll costs, interest on mortgage obligations incurred before February 15th of 2020, as well as rent under the lease agreements in force before February 15th of 2020, and utilities for which service began before February 15th of 2020. Those utilities can be used for water, electric, gas, that type of utility. So on the next slide, then, we will go into the loan forgiveness, which is the part that everybody's really kind of interested in here. So when you close that loan and you receive those funds, that starts an 8-week covered period for you. So what we do is look to see, were you able to make payroll? Were you able to pay payments of interest on mortgage obligations, any payment on any covered rent obligation, and any covered utility payment? They are stating as of right now that it is anticipated not more than 25% of the amount forgiven may be for non-payroll costs right now. So during that 8 week, what this means is during the 8 weeks, you have that ability to turn in records showing you made all these payments from the 8 weeks to the end of that close of the loan and be potentially forgiven for those funds. You do have to have record of this, but the debt forgiveness could be impacted by a couple key factors, and we'll get into that here in just a second. The other key item to note for your accountants and everybody else is the debt forgiveness is also excluded from gross income. So when we think about the debt forgiveness on the next slide, we look at the number of full-time employees, a reduction in salary, and or if you have to restore your full-time employment. So reduction in the loan forgiveness can be impacted if your full-time number of employees from the 8-week period that we can request the debt forgiveness is different than your full-time number of employees from February 15th of 2019 through June 30th of 2019. So for example, let's say we have 90 employees here for the 8-week covered period. Last year we only had 100. You had a 10% drop there, so your amount that you are forgiven is reduced by 10%. The other thing to note is if you had a reduction in more than 25% of salary or wages before that covered period, and you do not restore it back, you could be have a decrease in that amount that you are forgiven by that appropriated amount that you decreased it by. You do have until June 30th of 2020 to restore that full-time employment and salary levels for any changes made between February 15th and April 26th. As we said, the application to forgive, once we are out of that 8 week, we will need to go back to the lender and request the debt forgiveness and provide proof of the payroll, rent, utilities, that kind of thing. And then the lender will request that debt forgiveness for you. The lender has up until about 60 days, it says, to get all of that in place. I don't think it'll take that long to get everything forgiven, but just an FYI, that may take just a little bit of a process right there once we start getting those applications in as well. So then on the next slide, then we take a look at a couple additional notes. As Mr. Salisbury said, the funds that are not forgiven will be termed out up to 2-year maximum with a maximum of 0.5% interest. All payments are deferred for the 6 months. However, interest will accrue over this period. They are waiving those normal loan and guarantee fees, as well as that letter of credit not available at any other bank. The reason why this program is so appealing to a lot right now, especially within the biofuels industry, is the no personal guarantee and no collateral right now. When we get into the EIDL loan, there is that personal guarantee that kind of comes in, and when we have businesses that have multiple owners in it, it gets a little tricky trying to get access to emergency funds. So on the just a couple of quick things for you guys to think about. As you said, April 3rd is when the small businesses and sole proprietors can apply. Independent contractors and self-employed individuals can start April 10th as well. A couple of key things to keep in mind real quick is to proceed with this at caution. There are a couple of things that our group will talk about, Justin will talk about here in just a few minutes, that may be a little bit better option for you around employee retention tax credit. So just make sure that you are very well educated on the programs that are available to you, because some programs, if you take like a PPP loan, you are not eligible for those employee tax credit loans. Or if you have the deferred payroll tax credit, if you do the deferred payroll tax credit, you are then, you can participate in the Paycheck Protection Program. You just cannot ask for the forgiveness of funds. So remember, if you do look at the ERTC program, the Employee Tax Retention Credit, you cannot participate in the Paycheck Protection Program. But if you do the deferral, you can participate in the PPP loan. You just cannot ask for the debt forgiveness. So be very well educated while you go into these programs. Next slide. And now I will turn it over to Justin to talk about the employee retention credit.
All right. Well, lots of fun with the acronyms between the PPP and the ERTC and everything else. I do want to...
Folks, if you don't mind my interruption, forgive me, but I'm going to disconnect. The presentation that was just made was outstanding and very thorough, and I would suggest that I expect the rest of these to be good as well. This is good advice, and hope we can be of some help, but I'm going to disconnect because it sounds like the information you're getting is very much the same I would give, and probably even more thorough. Appreciate being on the call with you.
Thank you again so much.
Take care.
All right. So the employee retention credit, like Kayla said, the employee retention credit and the paycheck loan is mutually exclusive. So we do want to make sure that you understand what that is, because there are places in which the employee retention credit will net you a better outcome than the 3P. What that is that's a credit where eligible employees can receive a tax credit against applicable employment taxes for qualified wages with respect to each employee for the calendar year. There are some buzzwords in there that we'll hit up, but nuts and bolts of it all is it's a 50% credit on wages up to $10,000. It's limited to the employment taxes. However, anything over your liability becomes refundable. So it is cash payment coming back to that. The effective dates for this is from March 12th, 2020 through January 1st of 2021. However, there are some stipulations. So if we go to the next page, we'll talk about the first keyword in there, and that's the eligible employer definition. To be an eligible employer, you have to have, one, carry on a trade of business in 2020, which seems to make sense. And then 2 comes into a 2-part test. The first one is that you have to show that you've either been fully or partially suspended due to government authority due to the coronavirus, and that would limit travel, group meetings, commerce, and so on. The second piece would say that you have to show a significant decrease in gross receipts. And the way that that's defined is that you take your gross receipts for the current quarter and compare them to the same quarter a year prior. And if you have a 50% decrease, then you count as an eligible employer for that quarter. Now that continues until your gross receipts come up to above 80% of the prior year same quarter. For tax-exempt organizations, you don't have the gross receipts rule. It's really just fully or partially suspended operations. So if we are a eligible employer, then the question is, what is qualified wages? Well, here's where we get a little tricky. It depends on how big you are. If you are an employer with more than 100 full-time employees, then what we get to take credit on are the wages paid to furloughed employees, that are employees that are not providing you service, but you still have them on payroll. If you're an employer with less than 100 employees, then all wages of the company count towards this credit. And much like with the PPP plan, qualified health expenses come into this calculation as well, as far as what you're able to get the 50% credit on. The one thing that we want to remember is that that is limited to 50% of 10,000 per employee, so that's a 5,000 max when you're looking at it. So really, when you're looking at this, to retain a lot of benefit is harder when you're over 100 employees because you're limited on the wages that you can take it on. But if you have less than 100 employees and you look at having any layoffs at all, this is a program that you want to at least look at, because the reduction of the forgiven loan could make it to where you are able to gain more cash out of this than you would have with the PPP. And like I said, it's tough to beat 0.5% interest rate, but like one of the person asking the question, if you have a line of credit with good terms that's open for you to use, getting the net cash out of it might be a better opportunity for you. So everybody's pushing. You need to go to the PPP, just like when tax reform first came out. Everybody was saying, "Oh, well, goodness, C corp rates. Everybody should be a C corp rate, a C corp." And the truth of the matter is, when you're looking at it, the answer is it might be, but there are a ton of landmines in this act. Just that you need to make sure that you're aware of, that you're looking at all the different things, and then you can make the best decision for what gives you the most benefit to keep your business running. Donna, I think you are taking on the next slide from this.
Yes, thank you, Justin. And Robert, just to be cognizant of everybody's time so that we're not taking more folks' day than what they had allotted for, I'm going to go through the rest of my slides rather quickly so that we make sure John and his team have time for their slides, as well as give attendees a chance to answer questions without going too dramatically over on the schedule. So just the piece I was going to talk about was some of the new unemployment benefits that are out there. And rather than get into too much of the details, I'm just going to recap that to say, don't assume you know what unemployment benefits and laws are based on history prior to the passage of the CARES Act and the other stimulus packages, because unemployment provisions have been expanded as from the perspective of the length of time that you can draw unemployment, as well as the amount that you can draw and who is considered eligible. And we'll have the slides available, so those details are in there. But just wanted to emphasize for everybody that unemployment has a whole new definition around it right now than it did, even 20 days ago. So when you're making decisions on layoffs, reduced schedules, et cetera, make sure you're looking at what all your options are. Again, want to thank RFA for this opportunity. We certainly are open to helping anybody and answer any questions that we have. And so, Robert, we'll transition over to John and his team now.
I appreciate that, Donna. Let me get you back to square one here, John. And John, it's yours.
Well, good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank RFA and their leadership during this crisis and helping the industry work through. Of course, our first concern is that everyone listening is safe and healthy with your families and your employees, and that you're able to stay so. We certainly are in the middle of historic times, and it's important that we understand this unprecedented action by Congress that is going to affect so many people. I mean, there's many of us that have obviously been working in this area for a long time. I've never seen an act like this that's going to impact so many. Well, today I'll just talk about a couple of things that we're going to continue to talk about of the CARE Act. And I'm going to talk about a few business tax provisions. And I'm going to do that rather quickly because that's not really the critical issues right now. There are some factors in there that are going to be important for everybody to be aware of as they go forward, but it's going to be a lot of things that are going to impact you probably later on in the year as we go forward. Then we're going to have Teresa Carlson, our manager at our firm, is going to talk about the Families First Response Act. And she's an expert in this area and will talk through that for us. And then Jamie Klein is going to talk about the Emergency Economic Injury and Disaster Loans, the SBA, and then how they tie in with the Paycheck protection programs. And so I'm going to go through some of the business provisions relatively quick because they'll be things that are, it's not going to be, this isn't the key factors that are going to be looked at through this act. First thing is delaying 2020 employers' payroll taxes. You'll be able to delay those 50% of them until 2021 and 50% until 2022. Again, this is one of those provisions that if you have debt forgiveness, you're not going to be able to delay your employer's employee payroll taxes. And so you have to think through these provisions and what makes sense. And so if you can't qualify for one, there's maybe another one you can. Employer retention credit, again, we went through that. That was part of the business tax provisions. But that's something that you need to be aware of going forward. Next slide, Robert. Congress put forward some modifications with the whole intention of what can we do to get cash back into the business's hands. And so a couple of them are just tax provisions that they're allowing, and they're allowing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2018 modified and limited some of the net operating loss carry forwards and carrybacks. And so what they've done is they've modified that and opened it up. So now in 2018, 19, and 20, you can carry back losses for 5 years. Just a provision that can help bring some cash into the business. We had modifications to limitations on pass-through losses. Those have been modified and allowing more losses to be passed through that they have before. Next slide. And we're accelerating the recovery of alternative minimum tax credits. If you have these tax credits that oftentimes it takes a period of time to get those, you can turn those into cash sooner now. And also the increase in the business interest expense that's allowed. We had some limitations. It's increasing from 30% to 50%. And that's going to be effective for 2019 and 2020. So again, allowing everybody additional benefits. The next one was there was a qualified improvement property fix. And that's really improvements to interior portions of commercial buildings. They're shortening up the life. This was intended to happen before. It was just a mistake that it got missed, but they but they have included it now so you can write off those expenses. Distilled spirits are going to be exempt from excise tax for alcohol used in hand sanitizers. But they made a distinction between denatured ethanol versus undenatured ethanol, and it's only if it's produced with denatured ethanol. So with that was very quick. I'm going to move on to Teresa and let her talk about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act.
Thanks, John. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act has probably been around the longest, but it's not even really been around barely 2 weeks. So it takes effect today. It's for any wages paid starting today through the end of the year. So if you as an employer paid some of these paid people to be off prior to April 1st, it does not count for this credit. It's also one of those things where you need to make sure your employees know and have notifications out for them to see. In this day and age with COVID-19, electrical versions of this being emailed to your employees is something that also will work. So we have those listed there. I'm going to try to go through it pretty quick because it's probably been around the longest, so you know most of it, but there has been some new information that just has recently come out late last night and today regarding this. This is an expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act. And with that, it kind of comes along with a lot of documentation. There's new guidance was released today by the IRS detailing out what type of documentation is needed, as well as how long you need to have that documentation for. For example, it states that you need to have this documentation for 4 years, which includes everything from the information from the employee that states why they're taking the leave, to how you calculated the leave, to the forms that your 941s or 943s, to take that and have all this documentation for 4 years. If you want to move to the next slide, Robert. Yeah, and with the expanded FMLA, it comes down to 2 different components. There's paid sick leave, and there's also this expansion of the FMLA for medical leave, which relates to so many people being impacted by schools closing and by their daycares closing. So it expanded the leave. So as on the next slide, it shows that there's employees who are entitled up to 12 weeks of protected paid leave. The first 2 weeks will come underneath the paid sick leave side, or can come underneath that. But if you have an employee whose child's school is closed and they are not able to go to daycare because the daycare is closed, they would qualify for this as long as your business is operational. So if your plant is running and an employee has a child who school's closed, they're going to be able to qualify for this. They will get paid at 2/3 their normal pay, up to a max of $200 per day. So for this extended leave, it will be a total of $10,000 that they would receive. Technically, the first 10 days are unpaid. They can either use sick leave or PTO from the employer, or they can interplay it with the paid emergency sick leave. And for this particular item, they need to have been, the employee needs to have been employed for 30 days to be able to take advantage of the additional sick leave, so 10 weeks. For this, and then the emergency sick leave portion of it is actually for every employee. It could be for someone who just starts on day 1 and day 2 they get sick, and they can actually take part in this, getting this 80 hours of paid time off. It's for full-time and part-time, and it is prorated for the part-time. The 80 hours is prorated. One item to note, that it's only 80 hours for the paid emergency sick leave. So if you have an employee who is advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, they will then have, and uses 80 hours, there's no more hours for them to use if one of their family members were to get sick. They can only take 80 hours. And then if you want to go to the next slide, one item to note is that the governor's I know a lot of different governors of different states have shelter in place or stay at home orders. Those do not qualify for the Families First Act credits, because if you go out to the CDC website, they do not qualify because of the definitions of what isolation and quarantine mean. And so as you're paying your employees, for you as the employer, you will get 100% credit on this. So for an employee who gets sick themselves, you have to pay your employee $511 per day, up to $5,110 total. Or the other items for 4 and 6, you would have to pay them $200 per day, or what their regular rate of pay is. And then you get that amount in a credit. And the new information that was released today, I apologize it's not on my slides, but that's how fast all of this information is changing. There's a new form called Form 7200 called the Advanced Payment of Employer Credits Due to COVID-19. And that particular form is going to be used for the Family First Act credit of wages, as well as the employer retention credit that was talked about earlier. One other item to note is that the paid emergency sick leave and the expanded medical leave can be paid intermittently, but if your employee is on site working, then from the paid emergency sick leave side, they would potentially not be able to take it intermittently. There's a lot of different requirements to that, so it comes down to documentation and so forth. And the Department of Labor has stated that your employee needs to provide that documentation to you. It needs to either be from a healthcare provider, or you need to have something that states that your daycare is closed or that your school is closed so that you qualify for getting the paid emergency sick leave or expanded medical leave, and that you as the employer can then take the credit. One item to note is that you cannot require, if you go to the next slide, you cannot require your employees to use their paid time off prior to giving them this paid emergency sick leave. And the way the credit will work for you as an employer will be that you, for example, if you have $10,000 worth of payroll taxes that you need to pay, and you have $15,000 of wages that you have paid related to the Families First Act, you can request a credit on this new Form 7200, and you will receive a $5,000 payment from the IRS. They state that you can submit multiple forms in a quarter, and all of this will be reconciled on your 941. So a lot of information there, new forms coming out, and it gets pretty interesting with some of your, especially from a salaried perspective, as far as when they qualify, when you qualify to get the credit, because if an employee is working from home, they technically are not able to take the expanded medical leave because they're able to work from home, and then it might turn into a conversation with your employer to determine if they can meet your expectations. That's very fast going through that, but I'm going to turn it over to Jamie.
Jamie, what slide do
Okay,
you want to be on?
thanks, Teresa. Go down about 2 or 3 more. Yeah, 1 more right now. Okay, thank you very much, Robert.
No problem.
Okay, we're going to jump right in on our last topic, and I'll go through this fairly quickly because of time constraints. And the last bucket of information we wanted to hit today, it's been referenced a few separate times, is the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, or EIDL. You might have heard it called a 7B2 SBA loan, so on and so forth. It is an existing program that's been out there for quite some period of time. Let's see. Okay. If you're keeping score, the EIDL application portal has changed every 1.5 days since last Thursday. So if you pull up the website and things don't look like they did yesterday, believe me, it's not your browser. This is an existing program that was used for physical disaster situation that the CARES Act added this economic disaster from COVID, provided about $10 billion for the program. And this time covers January 31 to December 31st of this year. Businesses will have to illustrate their economic injury. So we'll show the last 3 years worth of monthly sales and expected monthly sales for 2020, along with some other forms. The maximum loan is $2 million. Loans less than $25,000 require no collateral. Let's see, personal guarantees. So loans over $200,000. If you have an owner of your plant over 20%, you'll need to provide a personal guarantee for each of the owners over 20%. For companies, interest rate is 3.75. For nonprofits, it's 2.75, and it can be up to a 30-year term. Next slide. Now, needless to say, the CARES Act added or changed some key pieces to this. So as a part of your application, you immediately qualify for an SBA emergency grant of $10,000. The interesting thing is SBA has stated that their goal is to get this out within 3 days. I think that's a goal because we know right now that when applications were being turned in this last week, their goal was to review them in 2 to 3 weeks. So we'll see how that initial payment goes. Another interesting piece of this is there's no requirement to repay them. So if you apply for a loan and you're not approved, you still receive the $10,000 grant. Conversely, if you apply for a loan and you are approved, you can keep the $10,000 grant and you can refuse the loan. In the existing program, farmers or agricultural enterprises do not qualify. However, in the CARES Act, it provides the opportunities for all entities to apply that have under 500 employees, and therefore we believe farmers may not qualify. SBA is waiting on that guidance. We have asked for clarification, and so we hope to receive that guidance from SBA here in the next few days. Lastly, on this slide, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, small business owners in all states, DC, and all territories are eligible to apply. You do not have to wait for an economic injury disaster to be declared in your area. Interestingly enough, the Act allows an EIDL loan to be refinanced into a PPP loan. So if you have, in addition to that, if you have an existing SBA disaster loan, you can still qualify for an EIDL. However, if you're approved for an EIDL from this economic disaster, the two loans cannot be consolidated. They will still be separate loans. Now, one thing I forgot to mention about the refi. Why would you look at refining an EIDL into a PPP? That would remove, if you're concerned about that personal guarantee requirement. One other thing on this slide, affiliates will also be included as you look at number of employees, things like that. Business parents, subsidiaries, and other businesses with common ownership or management. We're seeking additional guidance on what affiliate means. Many times they look at controlling ownership or being able to make management decisions. SBA Form 5 states the following. Affiliates include but are not limited to business parents, subsidiaries, and other businesses with common ownership or management. Okay, next slide. I think as several speakers mentioned previously, we really want to be careful when evaluating your alternatives. In your situation, one way may be much better for you than another. For one example, if your business takes the employee retention, you can't take the PPP. So just thinking about this real quickly, if, as was previously mentioned, the maximum amount for each employee's qualified wages will not exceed $10,000. The tax credit is for 50% of that. Therefore, the max tax credit per employee is $5,000. So assuming you meet all of those eligibility criteria for the credit and you had 40 employees, you're looking at a credit of $200,000. So you could compare that as one example to a PPP loan of 8 weeks of your payroll costs and then any part of utilities, rent, or mortgage interest that you could add on to that. Next slide, please. To use a numerical example, and this is looking at a 60 million gallon or under plant, Looking over at EIDL, you could maximize, and this is before the guidance came out last night, so I'm just going to hit this real quickly, and then we've got an update from last night to see which one holds from the guidance the next few days. $2 million maximum EIDL loan. This includes that $10,000 grant. And then you make the decision that it would be beneficial to refinance the EIDL into a PPP. I'm going to assume, looking at the average 60 million gallon and under benchmark for last year, the average labor cost per month was $350,000. So a maximum PPP loan is 2.5 times your payroll, and I'm just going to use the labor cost as proxy for that. So for $875,000, you would have that PPP loan application. If you add the $2 million over, you've got a $2.865 million loan, knowing we removed that $10,000. Then you're going to look at 2 months of payroll forgiven, 2 months utilities forgiven, the way the original act was written, and that would be 1.44. Now, I'm not going to spend any more time on that because the guidance last night came out and said, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Last night, they said due to high subscriptions, it is anticipated that not more than 25% of the forgiven amount may be for non-payroll cost. Again, this is not what was written on the signed law last Friday, but if the guidance holds, then I'm going to use the same example as the previous slide, looking at the right-hand column, and let's see what's changed here. We still have our $2.865 million loan. We still have our $700,000 of 2 months payroll forgiven, but unfortunately, then we can't take a full 2 months worth of utilities. We can only take 25% more than the payroll. So we take an additional $230,000 in utilities, and this would leave us with a $1.935 million loan and a $930,000 grant. So stay tuned for more information. As several speakers have mentioned, things are changing rapidly. In addition to that, I would mention on the loan, we would not need to make any payments on this for somewhere between 6 and 12 months. Let's go one more slide, please, Robert. We're not going to go through this next slide, but depending on your situation, maybe you don't want to maximize a loan, you want to maximize the grant. And so we can actually, I think, pretty quickly calculate how much of an EIDL loan to apply for if you wanted to maximize your PPP grant and have a zero loan left at the end of the day. And one more slide, please. April 3rd, small businesses and sole proprietorships will be able to apply for the PPP. April 10th, they're thinking independent contractors and self-employed individuals will be starting to apply that day. And with that, Robert, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, appreciate that, Jamie, and thanks to both companies for sharing their time. Misty, if you can, unmute everyone, and I'd ask everyone on the call to mute your lines unless you have a question, and we'll do this as painless as we can with 61 folks on the line, but if you have a question, we'll take as many as we can. All right, Missy, we're going to have to mute him again. Apologize for that. I'm not sure where all that feedback is coming from the participants, but please use the Q&A at your lower right-hand corner. Type in your question. We'll get through as many of these as we can in the next 18 minutes, and then we'll take the rest of them offline. Looks like, Jamie, you've answered a couple here.
Yeah, this is Jeff. I was going to say it looks like some of our presenters have been very diligent in responding to some of the questions in the Q&A box. But for some of the questions that haven't been answered, maybe we just read those aloud and see if our presenters have some thoughts in response to those. You want to just read some of those questions, Robert, the ones that haven't been answered? And maybe even some of the ones that have been answered in case people aren't able to see that box themselves.
One of them I see is as not answered is how is gross receipts calculated for purpose of the employee retention credit?
I'll take that one. That's based on, and I'm sure nobody really cares, Code Section 448C. All it really says is gross receipts less returns and allowances. So that's what the code says on that.
Okay. Here's one. Some of the farm credit systems are looking to get approved to help speed up application process. We are unsure how quickly they'll be able to get approved by SBA, but SBA is working quickly. It may be good. Well, sorry, someone asked a question and it disappeared.
Yeah, I think the question there was, many ethanol companies are financed through cooperative banking groups, Farm Credit, CoBank, Compeer, and the initial response from those lenders is that they are not able to be the intermediary for SBA loans, and that they've been told to seek out another lender. Is anyone else getting the same advice? And I think Kayla answered that question, but just for the benefit of everybody on the phone, can you share some thoughts and advice in response to that question?
Jeff, this is Donna, and I mean, we've been in contact with CoBank, Farm Credit, and they are definitely working through the process of trying to become an SBA lender. Again, don't know how quickly they can do that. CoBank has said that, they don't intend to stand in the way of somebody getting one of these SBA loans, and so they'll work with other lenders. Farm Credit, when I spoke to them, they were still, and this was a day or so ago, so they may have their decision today, but they were looking through how they were going to handle the, in essence, no outside debt covenant in their loan agreements, but had anticipated that they would, find a way internally to work around that.
Okay, thanks, Donna. That's helpful. There was another question on here about using 2018 versus 2019 tax information. The question was if we have 2019 tax information, can we use that instead of 2018? And then there was kind of a clarifying question, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is Kayla, guys, it's Keiko. Right now we're actually getting a little bit of clarity ourselves because in the CARES Act, it says when we do look at the payroll, it says to go back a 1-year period prior to the date of the application. And then the application dropped yesterday and it says 2019 payroll. And so I put in a request to Mr. Salisbury there to get a little bit of clarity, as he had said it was 2018. But I do believe if we have 2019 available, we can use that. It's probably in the event that we don't have 2019 finalized that we can use 2018. So we'll get some clarity and send that back out to the group here.
Yeah, I might add to that, Kayla. I have seen one bank's request, and they were requesting the 2019 W-3 and W-2s. So they were definitely looking for 2019 payroll information. Doesn't mean they won't come back with a different request, but that's their current request.
This is John Christensen, and that's what we've seen as well. I think the issue that SBA has is that right now they can't check that with the IRS because the IRS is closed. But I think ultimately it's going to be the 2019 information that they're going to want to rely on.
Okay.
I think
that. Just go ahead, John. Were you going to say something?
Jeff, that you had brought up related to the lenders. In speaking with a lot of the lenders and through the Farm Credit Service and CoBank and such, I think the key issue is talk to your lender, discuss it with the lender. They're still making those determinations if they're going to do the loan. directly through themselves, but they do want to make this work. They do want to help their clients out. The key thing from their perspective is they just can't have their collateral compromised. And so as long as we can work around those provisions, I think that the Farm Credit Service lenders will be willing to work with everybody.
Okay, thanks, John. We did just get another question that says, I interpreted an earlier question differently than Mr. Salisbury. If the borrower has an amount available on an existing line of credit, are they able to certify per the PPP loan?
I will say a response. Even if they have, you don't have to prove that this is the lender of last resort. You just have to prove, you just have to show that there is economic harm. You've been impacted by COVID-19. Even if you've got availability on your line of credit, you can qualify for the PPP.
Yeah, I agree with that, John.
So you don't have to prove that you are unfinanceable in other ways, from other groups.
Yeah, they waived that requirement on the EIDL loan and the PPP loan. So you do not have to have that letter stating that you are denied by another lender.
Okay. Are there other questions? I think we've gone through the questions that have been typed into the Q&A box. I'd like to give folks another minute or two to type out their questions if they have them. Unfortunately, we're not able to open the lines for questions because of the feedback. John, Donna, Kayla, Jamie, any other bits of advice or guidance that you've thought of during the kind of Q&A period that should be shared with our folks?
I would just like to make the comment that this CARES Act of 880 some pages, it does take some thought. It does take some calculations. You do have to look at your company and to see what's the best route, what's the best strategy with all the different aspects of it. And so just approach it thoughtfully and do the analysis. There's all kinds of resources to help you, approach that analysis.
I echo John's comment and just would add, be patient, but also continue to pay attention, because there are pieces of this, as we've said, that they're still releasing the details. There are pieces that they're changing what they've already released and or releasing information that is different than what was written in the legislation that was signed late last week. So we're all working diligently to stay on top of it. It's an unprecedented situation of every time you think you've gotten on top of it, they release something that's different. And so you're circling back. So we're continually trying to get information out and keep everybody up to date. But just know we can get as frustrated as everybody else when, we can't provide you an answer and stay consistent on it in every situation, but doing everything we can to get there.
Okay. Thanks, Donna. And along with that, I think again, the advice or guidance from Administrator Salisbury that I'd like to underscore is, he said, look, there's a fixed appropriation for a lot of these programs. This is not a bottomless well. So the minute there is definitive guidance and applications available and the process is, starting, I think it would behoove, our membership and ethanol producers to act quickly in applying for this assistance if it's something you decide is in the interest of your business. There's going to be an incredible demand on these programs and on these resources. So to the extent that you can act quickly and nimbly, I think that's going to serve the industry well. Any other questions? We'll do a last call here for questions in the Q&A box. And the other thing I would point out is we did record this, and we've got the slides, and we'll make those available to our members. We're going to try and edit out some of the nonsense at the beginning of the call with the technical issues, but we will share that around with our membership. And again, if you have further questions, you know where to find us. And you know, again, I want to thank Keiko, Isom, and Christensen Associates both for being on the call today, along with Administrator Salisbury from SBA. Any final comments or questions from other presenters?
Jeff, just on behalf of Keiko, again, we want to thank you guys for letting us participate in this, and just encourage everyone on the call to ask questions of any resource that you can get to help get questions answered so you can benefit from these policies.
Thanks, Donna.
And we'd like to make sure everybody stays safe.
Yep. All right. Thank you, John. And again, we appreciate you guys taking the time this afternoon. And I guess at this point, we'll go ahead and wrap up the call. I don't see any further questions in the Q&A box. And again, I think our members know where to find you guys. And again, thanks so much for your time and expertise this afternoon.